Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Coroner. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Interesting way to end up discovering a body that basically they have like a little research place where it basically help detectives, people donate their bodies to basically for science so that people, pathologists as well as like detectives and stuff like that can get a better understanding of like the different conditions a body can be found in to kind of give them a better estimation of the time and death. So it helped like kind of resolve a lot of like those issues and stuff like that. And sadly, they end up finding a body that they didn't put there because the operation is run by a mother-son team of like the mother Angela and her son Dennis. And so I was like, because the moment that happened, I was like, didn't some other show also do this? I want to say it might be Bones that had a very similar circumstance. I'm not saying like even they're not even saying that they're the only ones that did, but it's like I know there's a crime drama that I watched that did that, and I just can't remember what. I want to say it was Bones because it'd be very befitting. Once again, I also because of the show Lucifer, I've got Bones on the mind. So I was recently also because I came across Emily Deschanel being cast in something, and I don't remember what it was. I was skimming through a website and I saw she was cast in something. I think it was like a new series she had gotten cast in. So like that's like I said, just like guts that like even more on my mind right now. But regardless, they end up finding out the body is of like a 16-year-old kid named Andy, and obviously they go and tell his sister, which is like he had disappeared. The cops at the time didn't really do a good enough job. They were actually like looking at her dad, single father and stuff like that as like the suspect back then, and sometime after the questioning and stuff like that, he had a stroke. Eventually the cops just labeled it as like, oh, Andy disappeared and whatnot. So because Angela's actually the one who recognized the body at first, and I guess that should have been a key sign with some of the stuff later on, because essentially, Roxanne kept Andy's room the exact same way it was when he disappeared, because on some level, she was almost like, right, we don't want anything to change just in case he ever does come back. She was kind of holding on to the past. Interesting title for this episode. I believe it's Back to the Future. So, interestingly wise, I said that weird. The CW wise, there's a Legends of Tomorrow had a episode called, was it Back to the Future Part 2 or something like that, something of that nature. So it's just like it's interesting. I actually thought it was fascinating because obviously they talk a little bit about the past, and Donovan makes a joke about like, oh yeah, like he had a high top. He's like, yeah, just imagine me having a high top, just even higher. It's just like, oh, thanks for the visual. I think it's interesting that Jenny didn't talk about her in her younger days. Like, oh, you should have seen me. Like, oh, I had the permanent. Like, you didn't hear that. That's why I'm like, I guess because like to be fair, Jenny's not the biggest about talking about the past. So I think that was done intentionally, but that could just be easily me reading too much into that. But I just think it's just interesting. He referenced and joked about it, but she didn't add like her own perspective in the conversation. I just thought it was interesting. But basically there was a letter from a girl named Helen telling Andy like, oh, I know you're cheating on me. She'd even put like a piece of her hair in there, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Also a little weird to do that, but later on when we find out she's like the spiritual kind of almost hippie, that she's in like crystals and talks about energy and stuff like that. What she's reading Jenny being like, yo, like you got like dark energy all around you. To be fair, Jenny's, she had the whole thing about her sister kind of redug up again, and she actually worked past that, and that came to rear its ugly head again. But then also like the Liam situation is the most recent thing, which even like Neil had just called her to be like, hey, like, I get you, like, you need to feel what you feel. I know you're angry and upset. Like, you're entitled to feel that way, but don't just completely, and you need a break from all this, but don't completely, like, stop there. But you've made a lot of progress. Don't, like, kind of undo it by, like, stopping now. So do contact me again. Like, we need to, like, keep working forward, but, like, feel what you're feeling right now. I know it sucks how everything played out with Liam, but at the very least, the fact is you spoke about how you felt. You put yourself out there like that, it's kind of a good thing. That's progress in its own right, and just feel what you're feeling. So, which obviously, like her and Donovan, neither one's talk about what they're really going through, because they both ended up buying different things. I forgot the one Jenny bought, but it was kind of related to that, of kind of just like kind of moving on type of thing. And then like the one Donovan bought was about healing, which he hasn't told anybody about it. So the only person he talked about it with was with the artist he was with, because she's like wondering about the scars, and it's like it's a byproduct of like the radiation I'm doing. She's like, oh, you have cancer? He's like, yeah. You know, and she's the only person he's outside of, like, you know, his doctor, like his she's the only one who knows it. Like, he hasn't confided in anyone else, and I think that speaks volume, because I think it's maybe a little easier for him to like confide in someone he doesn't really know, that he kind of just recently met, especially because she kind of, being the artist that she is almost like she sees him, you know, in a certain light. And I think maybe it just might be one of those things. So like, I get that, like, it's a little easier to like confide in people about certain things, because like, you know, it's not the same thing, but like, you know, to kind of make it a little personal, like anything I do in his YouTube channel, I never like share it with people I know. I'm way more okay with sharing like weird reviews and just like nerdy talk I have with like complete and utter strangers than I am with actual people I know. It just makes me more comfortable. I would never share anything that I do or write or anything with like people I actually know, because it just, I've done that before and I'm just like, no, never again. Not like I had bad reception or anything, but I have my weird little idiosyncrasies. So obviously, like, his circumstances are very more extreme, but I'm trying to like give a parallel example of just kind of like, right, it's easier to tell stranger stuff than it is like the people in your life, the people you know on a like daily basis. But regardless, it turns out like Helen had crafted a spell with like thumbtacks and stuff like that and blood, and it's like, oh, she was a very religious person, and it is interesting that she went out in the woods. The moment they introduced the fact is that it wasn't just Helen, that it was Angela as well, I was like, okay, there's two people. Notice that it's a triangle and there's a third empty spot. I was like, this is BS. There's a third person involved in it. It's like, I knew that before they even really even before Donovan did his research. I was like, no, I know how magic works. There has to be like an equilibrium to that. Like, it's a triangle for a reason. Like, you know, because it's like, yeah, if you do like God, what is it? The typical like star formation of like a, you know, a spell or something like that, you're going to need someone on every one of the like the 5 points of a star. Like, you would need someone on all 5 points, just because that's typically how that works. Maybe 6 people, because like there might be a 6th person like standing in the middle. So yeah, like that's how I figure, like, there's connectivity with magic and spells and stuff like that. So I figured as much. But it is interesting, like, how things kind of played out, because the person, like, that Andy was cheating on Helen with was Angela, and because at that time, because Angela let it slip about what they were up to, Andy came out there in the woods with the mask on that he was found with, trying to scare them. And in that time, Angela told him she was pregnant, because they ended up finding out like he has like a hole in his heart, and Jenny ended up connecting that to what Dennis had. So it turns out Andy's his dad, which is like, I'm curious. The way Andy's acting later on, I don't think I don't think she tells him in the confines of this episode, because that's going to be an interesting conversation later on, because like Roxana doesn't know, like, oh, like she's had a nephew this entire time she's never been aware of. Like her their father never knew he had a grandson this entire time. And in a way, like, I'm skipping around a little bit, but I'd like to believe that, like, you know, it's like that at least helps some of the healing process later on. It's like knowing, like, hey, like, this is Andy's son. Hi, like, you know, get to meet some other family. Like, hey, this is your aunt Roxana. Like, that was kind of one of my best friends, and this is your grandpa. Like, I like that on some level, you know. What I thought was interesting too is like they ended up staying at Helen's place, which that was a weird experience for Jenny. I wish I paid more attention to the clock, but essentially when like Helen came in and being like, oh, you need to kind of like let your past go, which obviously she did with Andy, because that was a whole spell about letting go. So when I was like, I thought she was kind of implying like when she let go of Andy, like, right, something went wrong, and like basically I thought Helen was kind of taking that on herself and be like, oh, like I kind of am the reason why he died, because like I wanted him out of my life forever. Essentially, I wanted to let go of him forever, and life karmically, you could make the argument it kind of played out that way. Like, yeah, he was kind of out of your life forever, not the way you meant it to be, but just life has a very dark and effed up sense of humor. Way of handling things, you know. But regardless, the fact is that she came to Jenny and telling Jenny to close her eyes and focus on the person and let go. And when she opens her eyes, like, Helen is gone, and it's not like, oh, she left and closed the door. It's almost like, wait, she wasn't here. Like I said, the fact is they turned to the clock and show that must mean like some time went by, but like, I won't go into it, but I wasn't able to rewind it to watch it because I was like, it's a whole like issue I have like with the CW app where this thing like it kind of crashes now like anytime like I rewind, so I like avoid rewinding stuff on the CW app. So I didn't notice what time. Whether time had actually passed or not. Was it supposed to be like, oh man, you were standing there for a while, like, wait, did that really happen or not? Or is it supposed to be like, oh, it's the same amount of time, like, wait, so did that actually happen, or was that all in my head type of, I didn't know what to make of that. Like, if I could rewind, I would have found out. But regardless, if you're aware, do let me know in the comments down below. Like I said, it's just like a technical issue that I'm like, I'd rather not have to deal with because it kind of screws up like any attempt to watch anything. Like, it screws up the whole, like, trying to watch the episode if I accidentally rewind or anything. Because, like I said, it screws everything up. I'm going on a tangent, but... So that's just, like, the reason why I couldn't just rewind for myself to see whether or not that was the case. I did think it was interesting that Jenny, like, was immediately out there, as Donovan says, like, oh, doing her Rocky. And she's just kind of, like... I think the whole thing just kind of got her pumped, and she just didn't want to go to sleep. It was just too much on her mind. And he's telling her, oh, let's go back. And she's like, no, I'm fine. He's like, what if I said I'm afraid of the dark? She's like, fine, let's go. I'm like, oh. Because also, because they ended up finding out the moment they found the thumbtacks in the bottom of his foot, because initially it's like, oh, if that's the thing, it has to be torture. But then I was immediately like, well, we know that there were thumbtacks put in a jar and everything. So it's like, what happened? Because Angela explained, like, when Andy was like, oh, like, I'm going to leave and skip town if you don't get rid of that baby, because he wasn't trying to be a father. But for her, it's like she ended up stealing Andy's clothes to, like, humiliate him, because it's like, oh, let's have, one more memorable time together, and had him, like, stripped down and close his eyes, and then she took off with his clothes. She's like, she had to basically choose between Andy. She's like, if I, she wouldn't change things, because, like, if I did change things, I wouldn't have Dennis right now. Which I love how giddy he is, because, like, obviously because of his condition, he never has, like, a steady enough hand to be a surgeon, which I think is so interesting, because he's like the inverse of Jenny, because Jenny was a surgeon and become a coroner, so it was like a little bit of an inverse in that regard. But I love that whole, like, you could tell a little bit, like, even before he started asking her out, you could tell, like, he's like kind of nervous around wherever. He's like, so when we're no longer colleagues, can I you want to go for drinks with us? She's like, I'd like that. He's like, cool Martinez. I was like, that's actually really adorable, and them both kind of laughing and everything together, and then we see them kind of going off for drinks, like, you're like, oh, that's awesome, that's so cute. I love that. That's why I'm thinking, like, nah, he probably doesn't find out till after the whole case is solved. I would assume because we never got his reaction to finding out, like, wait, that's got to be tough, finding out, like, oh wait, that was my dad I was working on. That's going to be a whole complication in its own right. But yeah, the moment they figured out, like, oh, there need to be 3 people for the circle, that's when they found out, like, well, it's got to be someone else. And Jenny went back to Andy's yearbook and saw, like, oh, Helen, Angela, and Roxana, best friends. And so we got the other side of the story, and it turns out she was there. It's like, yeah, my brother could be nice and a good kid, but he also was like a horny teenager. So, like, he was screwing over one of my best friends and sleeping with the other one. So, because Helen wanted to wait, because she was, heavily, like, her family was, like, heavily, like, religious, and, obviously him and Angela were having a thing, and so, like, obviously it's like, oh, let's get high a little bit, so, like, Roxana started handing out drugs, and I was like, oh, I'm surprised Angela took it. I thought she would have, but she didn't want anyone to know, like, what was up, so she pretended to take it, but then she took it out, because, like, yeah, she was pregnant. So, in her own way, like, Roxana was trying to, like, help out her besties, like, yeah, considering everything that was going on. So it's like, yeah, my brother was kind of... So I wanted to kind of help my friends. And the only reason why she came back at that time was because Helen had left her book, and it's like, right, she didn't want her religious family to know that she was mixed up in all of this. And Roxana, getting scared by Andy, and she was high at the time, bashed him in the face. At first, she's like, I know I was high, but that wolf was real. And the moment she said that, I was like... She didn't even realize it was her brother. And it's like, we found Andy with a wolf mask. She's like, no, you're telling me I killed my brother? I was like, damn, dude. It's because at first I was like, did she accidentally kill him? Like, what? It's like, yeah, it wasn't even intentional because she was high at the time, so that's why it's like she freaked out even more. Like, you know, it was a complete another accident. And the moment it's like, oh my god, I killed him, and the moment that's happening, you can see Jenny's look on her face, kind of her taking breath. I'm like, dude, this is hitting a little too close for home for Jenny. It's like, which that's why I think that makes her even more sympathetic to Roxana's situation. But then it's like, you know, it's like the conversation about like McAvoy's like, yeah, but how does Andy's body end up in the bog? Because they end up finding out, like, right after he got hit by the rock, he stumbled and he most likely stepped on the jar, and that's how he got the thumbtacks and stuff in his foot. But then, McAvoy's like, yeah, I hate loose ends, and you're like, the moment that happens and you see Roxana's father in the background, you're like, yo, this is a little too eerie. And it's like, it turns out he did the same thing. He was like, you know, for him, it's like every time he's like someone leaves, he says goodbye. And he's just like, every day is goodbye, you know. And he was talking about his son. It's like, and he's like, he was a good boy. And it's like, he's like, I'm sorry. I'm so sad, you know. And, sadly, Roxana's had to deal with this, like, you know, it's like, right, don't go through all of this again, because basically what she had said was, like, when Andy disappeared, she had a whole bunch of friends, but they kind of disappeared, and she's kind of like, yeah, she's like, I know, she's like, I'm grateful, because, I mean, because of being left all alone, like, so they taught me, like, I realized how strong I can be without them around, and it's like, you know, and she immediately starts drinking afterwards. It's her way of processing with everything, but it's like, you know, Jenny's like, right, you had to go through everything alone, but luckily Helen and Angela showed up, and she's like, did you call them? It's like, no, they just knew to show up. Like, you had to go through Andy's disappearance alone, don't go through this alone. Be there, have someone be there for you. Because it's, like, interesting because, like, she's kind of going through a very similar thing. Because she's, like, dealing with her sister's death. She kind of had to go through that a little bit alone. She didn't really have, like, someone that she could confide into and have them with her like that. So, Jenny's, like, ruling Andy's death and accident, and she's hoping, like, you know, this will bring the family peace. That's why I'm saying, like, I do hope at the end, like, Angela confesses and it's like, yeah, like, hi, this is your nephew Dennis, he's Andy's son, and, you know, doing the same thing to her father. Like, it gives some alleviation. It doesn't make up for the past, you know, that pain, but it can alleviate it to some degree. So that's why I'm hoping there'll be kind of a happier ending in that regard. The other angle to this is that McAvoy finds out that the tumor shrunk, but there's like a hole in his spine, and they can perform surgery, but there is a small chance it would affect his walking, like he could get paralyzed. So it turns into a conversation about, you know, what is he going to do? Once again, not being able to confide in anyone about it, which obviously Jenny's saying that conversation about peace. He's like, yeah, because I think on some level, there's probably some part of him that's like, yeah, I kind of want some peace right now. And obviously he goes out to like a field. He's holding the healing rock and he's screaming because it's just kind of like, it's a lot to take on. And, you know, Jenny's dealing with her own burdens by herself. Donovan's handling a lot of stuff on his own as well. So it's just this episode kind of like went full circle in a lot of, not full circle, but like, it drew a lot of parallels to their respective situations in many different facets. But so that was interesting. And then at the very end, because obviously we had seen it earlier in the episode that while working on this particular car, Jenny's dad was seeing that lady again from last episode, which I was still like, yeah, that's definitely got to be Jenny's. Because he's like, hey, Jenny's mom, because it was like, hey, do you know, it's like, if you get, you know, if I get this car fixed up, where do you want to go? And she's like, how about the drive? And it's like, oh, we haven't been in forever. And it's like, yeah, he's like, I'll get the buttered popcorn and stuff like that. They're laughing and giggling. And then Ross is kind of like, oh, it's almost like she's on a date when he's talking to his mom later. And it's like, yeah, it's Peggy. And it's like, huh. It's like, do you know who Peggy is? She's like, yeah, Peggy is short for Margaret. And Margaret's my mom. And I was like, yeah, I figured as much. So it makes you wonder, like, when she left. Because I think Jenny was a little girl. I'm wondering, was it, like, did she leave and never came back into their lives type of thing? And I'm sure that's kind of more annoying, too, like, with everything she's dealing with. And now it's like, right. Because, like, her issues of kind of being abandoned are deep-seated. You know, like we touched on that a little bit earlier when Neil was talking about, like, you know, earlier in the season where, like, Neil was talking about, like, how she just assumed, like, when Liam left that it was like, oh, we were through. It's like, why'd you jump to that conclusion? It's because her mom was out of her life. So she kind of has some abandonment issues. So that's why I'm like, did she ever find out about, you know, was he ever able to get in contact with Margaret about what happened to Katie, and has she kept up with Ginny's life and stuff like that? I don't know, you know, because, like, her, obviously she hasn't been in her grandson's life, obviously, but she hasn't been in Ginny's life. Like, at what point did she leave Ginny and them all those years ago, you know? So that's definitely going to be interesting, dealing with that, because I'm curious, is that going to finally put Ginny in a position where it's like, right, all this talk has made her decide to go looking for her mom, you know, after all this time? We'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.